Welcome back to the Dormant Politics Podcast. My name is Justin Fisher.
I'm Austin Vertine.
And my name is Nolan Flaherty. And tonight we have a special guest with us. His name is Christopher Grady. He's a fellow classmate with us from OHS. I wanted to bring him on to this podcast. We're going to talk a little bit about institutionalized racism. And I think Chris has a lot to offer as a part of our podcast, as he has some personal experience with this topic. And it's actually a different perspective that he's going to be able to provide for us in this conversation. So I'd like to welcome Chris Grady to our podcast. You can't say that racism is completely gone from our generation when this is a problem that is carrying over today. Nobody has gone out to fix the inner cities. It hasn't been state government. It hasn't been national government. There hasn't been anything done to fix this issue. Mm-hmm. So I think the perpetuation of sort of the crime in inner cities has caused targeting of blacks because they're in a crime-ridden region. But that was a result of white America moving from the cities. So you could say that indirectly, this movement of whites is reason for today why blacks are being targeted so much and why there's so much crime in that region.
I'm kind of willing to acknowledge that, right? We definitely see aspects of the past, of racism in the past, where white families didn't like their kids going to school with black kids. They didn't like living in black neighborhoods where there was higher rates of crime, so they left and they moved into the suburbs. So as a result, we see higher percentages of blacks and Hispanics in the inner city than whites. So there is an element that the racism in the past affects today and the future. So, I mean, where do we go? The question is, where do we go from here, right?
Yeah. I think that's something good to talk about.
Do we tell black Americans continuously that they're victims of institutionalized racism that happened in the 1960s? Or do we say, here, shitty stuff happened in the past. We still feel effects of it in the future. This is how we solve it. Instead of saying that from birth, because of the color of your skin, you're going to be a victim to that institutional racism. So I think there's an element of dangerous rhetoric that you use when you say that institutional racism still exists from the 1960s because we still see the effects of it.
But I talked with Chris about this a lot. I'll let you jump in a sec. But I talked with Chris with this a lot, and we talked about how black America could start to want to change things. I asked him about Obama, and you can talk about it a little bit if you want. Explain, like, what did people think about Obama? Like, what was the
initially? It was like a breath of fresh air. You know, it's because we finally got somebody in office, a black man. Finally, mm-hmm. Right? You think he's gonna do right by the people? He's gonna bring us out of oppression. But I don't know if you remember from our conversation. It kind of just boils down because something so often happens in the black community. When one person shines, we'll glorify them for a little bit, but then that flame dies out because nobody else hops on board. And this is something that Josh, his professional name is Josh, you call him Cooley, the guy that cut my hair. He owns that business. He owns the salon that he's cutting at. Mm-hmm. He hinted at this as well. In our community, nobody supports each other. It's just a lack of support from brother to brother. So it's like, that goes to your question, how do you move on from here? We can't move on because we are still stuck in what happened back then. We are still stuck on the white man that's supposed to hate us because that's what's taught in the homes. In my opinion, I think that the conversation from birth should change. But I can't say that to every single black household because not everybody's going to listen to me. Some are extremists. I hate the white man. I never want to do anything with him. Others are more lenient and are like, okay, I'm willing to move forward. And then there are those who are just in the middle and are, I don't know what they're doing in the middle. But
I think when we talked about Obama, we also said there's no reason for a black person to go out and vote because, especially in these inner cities, whether it's a Democrat, whether it's a conservative, neither of them is offering a plan that's going to help them in the long run.
Yeah.
And we've seen that time and time again that there's been nothing done to really affect or solve problems within the inner city. And I think people are going to continue to suffer. And I don't know when there's going to become a point when inner city America is going to find a candidate that's actually going to represent them and be someone that's going to be plausible.
It's definitely not. We focus so much on the presidential election. Everyone says
it's not all presidential.
I know. Yeah. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying we focus so much on Barack Obama was a black man. He's going to fix race relations in the inner city of Chicago. And Barack Obama was from Chicago. He's the president of the United States. He represents the state of Illinois in Chicago too. But he's also got 50 states to also represent in so many other cities, right? So it's difficult to say because you elect President Obama, something in your neighborhood is going to change. So I think what Black Americans have to focus on, and not just Black Americans, I mean white Americans and Hispanic Americans in the inner city that are also in poverty. They have to focus on the fact that just because you elect a Democrat to the president of the United States, your community is not going to change. Okay, the Democratic Party, specifically in Chicago, is running a machine out of the city of Chicago.
Yeah.
Okay, so voting Democrat in your local elections is so ineffective, and voting Democrat in the presidential election is completely ineffective at solving things in your neighborhood. If you want to solve things in your neighborhood, in my opinion, then in the inner city of Chicago, they need to start voting Republican. And not just for the Republican Party, but I think you need to figure out conservative candidates that have conservative values that aren't going to push this idea of victimhood onto the Black community. They're not going to continue this machine politics that oppresses white, Hispanic, and Black Americans in the inner city of Chicago.
Chris, I was going to ask you this on top of the question that Nolan asked, and it's about Donald Trump. So what is the sort of opinion that you have come up with about Donald Trump? Do you see any hope on his policies that it could somehow change the course right now?
So this is gonna sound like I won't tell you how it's gonna sound. You just take it how it is, all right? So I agree with your point on the fact of just because Obama got in office doesn't mean anything's gonna change in your neighborhood, because that's how I feel about Donald Trump. He's been elected for how long now? Nothing in my individual neighborhood has changed, you know? Nothing that do I agree with everything he says? No, not at all. But nothing that he's actually said or that he's actually implemented has impacted my life significantly, you know? So that kind of backs up your point of who you vote for. You know, you can vote Democrat, you can vote Republican, but you have to really look at it like what's gonna change for my situation. As far as his policies go, in terms of everything that he wants to do, I think there's a certain way. You know what I think? I think Donald Trump is a very smart man, and that's why he markets himself as he does, because that's what he does. He markets himself, and he's out there, and all of his policies, whether they're good or bad to me, he's getting them out there, and people are going to agree and people are going to disagree. But that's what he's supposed to do, you know? And I think that's what a lot of people from my community don't understand. They get really hot-headed really quickly because of something that he might say. Whereas in my opinion, I don't let it get to me because that's what the man is supposed to do. You know what I'm saying? So
there's a few things that he said, though. There's things about, for example, like becoming a little more tougher on crime. For example, he called during his campaign to send the National Guard into the south side of Chicago.
I don't think that's necessary. I
think it's something that communities, localities, municipalities should be dealing with. So,
but do you think that?
But they're
power?
clearly
Exactly.
not dealing with it right now.
Yeah,
So I think the city of Chicago, like honestly, we go to Chicago, but honestly, I just go on to what Michigan Ave, right? Like the safer areas of Chicago, the nicer areas of Chicago. But honestly, if you go into the more ghetto areas of Chicago,
Madison and Pulaski, Jackson Boulevard, 56th Street.
It's extremely dangerous. I mean, you have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 murders a day. It's literally out of hand, right? It's so honestly, if as the president of the United States, if you saw the city of Chicago seeing all of these murders a day, and you saw that the city of Chicago was not handling it, that the people of Chicago were not voting in people to deal with this crime, then I think, honestly, the President of the United States has a responsibility, a duty to step into the city of Chicago and make sure that those citizens are safe. I mean, these are communities that are crying out for increased law enforcement to stop the crime in their communities. Well, I'd much rather have municipalities, localities, and the state government at the highest level to be able to deal with this. I don't like the federal government stepping into local government at all.
Don't you think, though, that sending National Guard
I think it's a little
or the
bit,
military
it's unnecessary. It's
that's just pouring.
It's martial law.
That's just
It's
pouring
ridiculous.
fuel on fire.
Yeah.
There's we have to analyze that there's already a damaged relationship between the systems and the black people that are in the system.
But I think that's dangerous
rhetoric.
rhetoric.
There's economic problems, there's political problems, there's judicial problems.
But what is the statistical merit based on saying that? We hear that a lot. We hear that from leftist groups like Black Lives Matter, MSNBC, the Young Turks, and the Democratic Party. Okay, and we do. We hear this rhetoric that institutions of government, that police are racist, that judges are racist, the courts are racist, the Department of Justice entirely is racist, state courts are racist. But there's legitimately no statistical merit for saying understanding that. So when we look at police brutality, specifically in 2017, we have 987 people that were killed by police in 2017. In 2017, and in general, actually, black Americans are 3 times more likely to be killed by police officers. I'm willing to acknowledge that. That's fact. Okay.
That immediately.
Hold on.
That immediately
No,
breaks down.
987 people were killed by police. 2% of them were black and unarmed. And those are sad, but it's not necessarily unjust, right? If we look at a case like similar to Mike Brown, right? If you grab the officer's weapon, that's a case where it's a justified killing. But I'm saying only 2% were unarmed, okay? Were black and unarmed. The reason so many black Americans are being killed by police at a rate of 3 times higher than whites is because black Americans are threatening officers with weapons at a significantly higher rate than whites. So
there's no
a
statistical
police officer
merit to
today,
that statement in any way.
a police officer today in the United States,
you just took
is
that
18
statement
Hold on.
that black Americans
Hold on.
are pulling out weapons more than white Americans. You took that statement out of your ass. There's
Black
no way that you
Americans,
have any statistical
police
merit.
officers today are 18.5 times more likely to be killed by a black man than a black male is to be killed by a police officer.